Ooh. You excited?
I am.
All right. That's an excited sounding voice. Let's do this.
Let's do it.
Hello, it's another hot fix. It's the second of these. My name is Justin Searles. I'm the host of Breaking Change, and this is a show within a show where I talk to another person in real time. It's a new thing. It's not an interview, and it's not a panel discussion. It's just two people getting angry about something. The version number, it's a patch release on our catalog, is version 42.0.1. And my guest today, I'm really excited to have, because he just seems smart as hell and keeps coming up with clever analogies, ideas, and writing that makes me wish I would have written it, which is really frustrating. So I want to roast him. His name is Scott Werner. He's the founder and CEO of a Ruby AI startup called Sublayer, which I still don't understand sufficiently, and he'll probably have a chance to plug at various points. He helped start the Artificial Ruby startup in New York City, which, not if that's false. Okay, so he's nodding. So he may have been involved. And he works. He has a website, which is a Substack. Works on mymachine.ai, and it was a very easy RSS follow for me because his blog posts are really good. So you should go do that, even if I really suck at interviewing. So remember, this is, only the second one of these. This is not a typical interview show. Each guest that comes onto the hot fix, they come prepared, prepackaged with some kind of problem that they get worked up about, that's been something stuck in their craw. And my job is to rant and rave about that problem with them. We explore the topic, and ultimately I try to get them to say stuff that could get them fired, or at least in trouble. So with that out of the way, Scott, welcome. What's got you worked up today?
Hey, thanks for having me, Justin. Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that's got me really worked up, and we've kind of been going back and forth on it a lot, is this idea that we've kind of gone through this period of pretty stable working environment, pretty comfortable time as engineers, and things are changing, and I don't see the urgency. Like, I don't see the activity, I guess the way I'm looking at it is, like, when I got started around 2008, it was tough. It was tough for everybody to get into the industry. Things were changing. It was a brand new platform. There was a lot of, what do you call it? You had to do a lot of side projects. You had to do a lot of work outside of work to keep up with what was going on. And then we went through a period of about 15, 20 years where you haven't had that. And now AI is changing that. And you really need to, like, re-examine a lot of the comforts that we've had, a lot of the best practices that we've had. And I'm not seeing a lot of really, digging into that or really pushing on it.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, there's the economic reality, as well as the software as industry reality, as well as just the kind of forward march of technological progress reality. And the software industry, so you tell me if I'm wrong here, but the software industry was effectively, like, in constant chaos, churn, revolution. Not just, it wasn't just Moore's law and doubling the count of transistors. It was how we approach software fundamentally changed every couple fucking years. Preemptive multitasking, like virtual memory, pagination, CGI bin stuff. Oh, there's more creative ways to run server-based applications. It's like, oh wow, like we got web browsers and we can deliver software that way. All of these, it was hard to go 18 months without some sort of revolution happening. Right. And new languages coming out all the time. And so then there was just this, and you and I were using this analogy yesterday in prep, so I'm spoiling it here, is around 2008, and as the industry kind of recovered following the great financial crisis, it was a turbulent time from a job market perspective, sure, but we were actually like with the advent of Rails and just the sort of the consistency of the playbook that VC-backed startups that were building SaaS apps and trying to build network effect, all kind of like subsidizing our lunches and our laundry and our ride shares for 15 years. There was like an unprecedented peacetime technologically. Like everything became everything asymptotically was approaching JavaScript in terms of just how samey everything was. It's like, oh, do you do this language or that language or that language? Oh, well, we're all basically, all of our jobs are kind of similarly shaped and all of the technologies we're using are mostly the same. Is that kind of like what it was like until somewhat recently?
That's kind of what it feels like, and it still is like that now, and there's a lot of people clinging to it, I think. I said this to somebody recently, and it's or it came up in a conversation recently, and it's stuck in my mind. Thinking back to those early days of Ruby, can you imagine if we were having a conversation and I told you 20 years from now, most developers are going to write their Microsoft TypeScript in their Microsoft VS Code and store it on their Microsoft GitHub? Like that just seems, from somebody that grew up in that time, it seems crazy. It seems crazy that we're in this future. Not that any of those are bad or wrong or anything, but just that that is the kind of the default now, right?
Well, there's that quote that I've seen attributed to a dozen people, including Bill Gates, who's a software person, is that everyone, overestimates how much change is going to occur in 1 year and underestimates how much change will occur in 10. And so, yeah, you're right. Like in a 10, 20-year time horizon, there's been a lot of stuff that's interesting that's changed. But boy, like, I feel like you could have entered this industry in 2007, 2008, and I feel this way because I did in a big way. And feel like everything was sort of just in the process of settling in, like Rails was newish. It was a valuable skill to learn. Agile was kind of reaching a sort of like a stasis point. A lot of the follow-on technologies like GitHub and our kind of modern issue pull request based workflow, those were sort of baked in the cake and seemingly inevitable. And then nothing really changed. So like there, to a certain extent, I think, I don't feel like I fell prey to this, but you could get, I could see that you wouldn't blame somebody for kind of going soft because they grew up in an environment where it's like pretty straightforward. Everything was spoon feedable. Everything was boot camp scriptable in terms of this is like software developers are like short order cooks now. And this is the sort of recipe that you follow. And then out the other end comes acceptable software of the form that we've all become accustomed to making it. And that's no longer seemingly the case.
Right. Yeah. And it's telling, right, that software went from this thing that was, pretty rare or was, there weren't a lot of people building software to something that you could teach in a boot camp for 6 weeks, it became so formulaic that you could get a job as a junior developer by going through one of dozens of, or probably hundreds of boot camps, right? And then, I think you mentioned around, the whole startup ecosystem. I've also gone through some accelerators. So this isn't and not a dig at boot camps or anything, but that
please dig at them though. but that's like, what we're here for. Come on,
accelerators as well. Like that's another telling that like it became so formulaic. There were all of these things that you do that you go through an accelerator, like startup boot camp, to learn how to do the startup thing, and that I see that as kind of telling of the time period that we kind of just went through, right?
So what do we do with that? Like, what does that mean? Like, imagine somebody joined a boot camp, signed up for a boot camp in 2011. They were in there for 6 months. They got a job as an apprentice. These terms are heard less and less these days. They worked their way up inside of that company for 2 years, call it, before bouncing around 3 or 4 different startups. And now they've got, here we are 10 years later, and maybe they've got a staff programmer badge on their resume or whatever, and they're in that role. And, let's say, like, again, this is a hypothetical person and doesn't resemble thousands of literal fucking people I can think of right now. They're kind of a cozy cat, you know, like they've never had to compete under, you know, an environment where they really had to, like you were saying at the outset, had to learn stuff in their free time to keep their job or to stay competitive in the job market, because people were, you know, everyone's advice, if anyone needed a job, was learn to code, because the jobs came so easily, because the software industry was so, its appetite for bodies was insatiable. And that's obvious. We don't have to explain to anyone listening that's not the case right now, with like CS grads at 6.8% unemployment from prestigious schools. I'm just curious, like, what, get in that person's headspace a little bit, get in their grill. Like, is that an archetype that exists a lot, and like what's their experience like right at the moment?
Yeah, I suspect that is a pretty common archetype. And, you know, I think even the archetype that I was kind of describing, that, you know, we ran into a lot in the, you know, in the early 2010 era, that actually you mentioned, how did you phrase it in your, there's no AI in team post, the highly engaged, driven programmers, the go-getters that are using, you know, Rails and Node when it first came out. You know, even those people that would have been, you know, in that time, haven't really had the opportunity. There hasn't been really a need for it. And like we were going back and forth, like the job was keep up with, you know, learn React, learn Rails, or, you know, make sure you know whatever the newest what is it, like state library in React was when you change jobs, and, you know, follow the style guide. That was the role. Whether you came from a boot camp and made it up to staff, or you were interested in programming, there wasn't really, you know, barring like a few fringe things, nothing to scale of like a Rails or a, you know, a Node for a long time.
So there's this, you know, the elephant in the room we haven't actually talked about, like the thing we're talking about is AI. You know, like that's the thing. Like there is the economic change. There's the technological chain of like code generative AI tools are the X factor. And it's so hard to tease this apart, because on one hand, even before coding agents became good, we were experiencing layoffs and softer demand and a pullback of, you know, VC funding as like the zero interest rate phenomenon disappeared, right. You know, just from a financing perspective. And so now it's like, if you're let's say you're a tech executive who spent the last 5 years kind of grinning and bearing it through DEI initiatives and all of the sort of creature comforts that programmers in their mollycoddled jobs, like the on-site masseuse and the full-time remote work and the unlimited PTO and all of those things that you had to, under a highly competitive hiring market, had to accommodate. Now, like, if you're telling your people, hey, we're having a return to office, hey, there's an expectation now that, like, you know, maybe you have fixed PTO and we're buttoning up a little bit, we're going to pull back some of these benefits. And you could say it's so that we can lay off fewer people by reducing our kind of run rate or our costs. But another way that they're justifying it is they're saying it's like AI is going to make us faster, better, stronger. And anyone with half a brain can look around a lot of these organizations and say, this isn't really about AI. This is about, these guys all saw that Elon could get away with it at Twitter, and now they've been red pilled, and they're like Andreessen Horowitz on the podcast, you know, talking about starting their own colony on Mars and getting big into crypto. And so from the perspective of, I think, a lot of these cozy cats, right? Like AI skeptics, people who just wanted the job to be a job, they're looking at this and they're like, this is just like crypto. This is just like a kind of another pump and dump scheme. And it's just, you know, labor getting browbeaten again. So square that, right? That sort of economic and labor market side of things and the social pressures with the technology. Like, because you have an AI startup. I assume you think this is more real than that.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it's more real than that. You know, to your point around, you know, seeing Elon getting away with it at Twitter, I think it's been, you know, it was such an open secret that, they caricatured it on Silicon Valley, the whole like rest and vest, you sit on the rooftop of your Hooli office you roll your desk chair up, up to the roof and drink Slurpees all day and until you're done vesting. Like it was an open secret. Like everybody kind of knew about that mentality in big tech, or like that opportunity in big tech. And so, yeah, I think the part of the economic, the economic reality of it was seeing Elon getting away with it, having AI be a nice scapegoat for it, and then being able to kind of clear out some of those people that are just kind of hanging out. But I mean, actually, the one thing to veer off in a little tangent. I think the crypto thing is another example of what I'm seeing, I guess, or at least like the change in mentality of the industry for, I guess what the peacetime did to all of us. In crypto, there was absolutely the scams and grift and all of that. But at the same time, there was so much really interesting engineering and like use of technology that was under the surface. But like once you dug, it was very cool. Like and I tried to like spend time explaining that to people. Like there's something really cool here. You don't actually have to engage with the pump and dump scams. You can engage with this cool part, which is we've got a global database that anybody with all of the software to read and write to it is open source. You've got protocols and software built on top of these protocols. And there are some groups out there that figured out that the NFT protocol, it basically was like this database has this field called token URI, and token URI returns JSON in a specific format. And somebody figured out that you can base 64 encode that JSON and base 64 encode the image on there and store those images right there in the database. And all of the software that's built up around it will basically treat it like everything else. But by being a part of this open source database, it can be remixed, it can be people can do things with it, create a whole Creative Commons community around it. Very, very cool stuff. A lot of the focus was on the scams, and they're not enough digging into like, is this technology really interesting?
Difference, to interrupt you, just because one huge difference between crypto as a technology that's very interesting and AI code gen as a technology that's very interesting is like, to explain how crypto can be not a grift, you have to talk for as long as you just talked. And to explain how AI can be not a grift, you can just say, hey, look, it wrote my app for me and the app works. And that's a night and day, like, in terms of the sales cycle, like, it's almost like a religious experience where I'm seeing people who are dyed in the wool opposed to this stuff or assuming it's yet another grift or scam because we're all so tired of them. And then they install Claude Code, they pay $100 or $200 for a max plan, and then they like really quickly realize, oh wow, my like rainy day list of little tiny apps and one-shot things that I want is done now because it blew through all this stuff so fast. And then they see the light, and now they're converts. Like I'm seeing a lot of that. And with crypto, you gotta give such a long wind up to explain how maybe theoretically somebody could have a meaningful application with it.
Fair. That's fair. I think in there's something that like, and this is another, conversation we'd had before of, growing up, my experience and our experience was with our computers was like, you broke it all the time and you had to dig in there, you had to fix it. Not that anybody really enjoyed it, but like a lot of, my time from elementary school to high school was like debugging the things that I broke on my, computer, and like getting into like the details. And, I think that's that whole thing of, it took until Claude Code, and it took until really Claude Code and Sonnet 4 before some of those holdouts started coming around. But like these things were capable of doing really magical, interesting stuff if you dug under the hood and like started poking at the technology. Like even, you know, I didn't make it in the by the time 3.5 came out, but like as soon as I saw 4, GPT-4, that was when it was, you know, with a 8K context window. Okay, what can we do with this? This is really interesting, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, so you know, like I don't necessarily want to have a long drawn out conversation about the utility of crypto as such. However, just because I don't care about crypto, like I think there's been a lot of funny YouTubes that just eviscerate that industry and whatnot, like line always goes up and whatnot. But again, that's not what I want to. I think that as an example, it's actually a really good point of for the median programmer in the industry, right? Maybe they've got a tenure of 3 to 5 years of experience. That means they've only ever existed in sort of the post-agile SaaS website is 99% of the ways that programmers actually program for money as their job, right? There's sort of this homogeneity of the landscape where we're all roughly filling in these relatively fungible roles. It's like, oh yeah, do you do Python? Yeah, I do Ruby. Oh, so your models look like this and my models look like this and your views look like this and my controllers look like this. And there's just not that much actual technical stuff going on. We're all sort of just information routers of whatever the requirements are and then how to data model it and then how to get it on a website and how to fight with the JavaScript to make it like, you know, dynamic in the right way and then deliver it and then test it with a slow UI testing framework. And that's kind of like and then find an overwrought, overly complicated way to deploy it so that the ops people can have something to do. And that's basically been the industry for 15 years. But in that time, right, like before that, programming was like actually like make your computer do cool shit. And like anything with technology in it could like be hacked and customized. And crypto is an example of that. And so I saw crypto and I was like, I don't see how this fits into the world of how people make money with software at all. And so then the crypto bros and the finance people come in and they're like, oh, here's a way to launder money and hoodwink suckers. And that was the more immediate thing because there's just no creativity left in the room of how to do how to build interesting and valuable things with software because there's just so much money for boring ass SaaS apps.
Right.
Well, I'm glad we solved that then. So drilling in though, like let's zoom in even further to this median developer. You know, I spent a long time as an agile coach teaching people test-driven development, going on to teams and like never prescriptively like thou shalt do this, but like as a team I'd be like, hey, you know, like there's this useful skill called pair programming and we could all do it where we play various games or different modalities where it's like maybe we all do ping pong pairing. And so every day we have 2 kind of big pairing sessions and you rotate pairs every half day. And let's say that like, you know, one of you will write a test, the other one will write the production code to make the test pass, as well as the subsequent test, and then ping pong back to you and you'll write the opposite. Meanwhile, the other serves the role as navigator, pointing things out and helping you while you're thinking procedurally and writing the code. It's a way to do it, but in order for it to be effective, you need more than one person to tango. And so like, let's all do this as a team, right? And so I was on a lot of projects where pair programming was a great way to build, you know, shared knowledge and understanding and get everyone leveled up and skilled up to the same level. But it also had like downsides of like some people smell bad and some people on the team are awkward. And like we all have to be in the same place at the same time. And if somebody has a doctor's appointment, it could like screw things up because now you have an odd number of people. And so like those kinds of things fell out of favor because the competitive landscape of employment and just, I don't know, human nature and path of least resistance was I want to have my headphones on and I want to like work on issues in relative silence and in the comfort of my own home and, you know, with my favorite music on and so forth. Right. Like that's where we were. And now I guess my question is like, what about this new world is going to really change for that person if the theory of the case is that like AI changes everything.
Yeah. I've spent a ton of time thinking about this, and you know, I think we've similar experiences. I, for my first startup the CTO was from Pivotal Labs. So we paired 100% of the time. We test drove everything. My next startup, I was the CTO. And so I test drove everything, first engineer, we paired all the time. So like, I understand that side of it a lot of, that, both of them can actually be, a comfort that like, yeah, it's comforting to put your headphones on, really get into the zone with the code and like load all of it up into your brain. But it's also comforting to know that like we're pairing, we're not going to run into any roadblocks. Like I'm going to be able to hand off to you and you're going to be able to hand off to me. And we're going to get into like this zone. And I think, both sides are actually going to be in for a big change with AI. A lot of my first experiments were trying to do ping pong pairing with an AI agent. I set up one agent that did Kent Beck has this test and commit or revert process, and so I'd try that with an agent. But I think a lot of that's changing. Now that we see these agents being able to like let them go, and like let them work on bigger and bigger things. A lot of the things that we built up for working with code in our brains or working with code with two brains is kind of out the window. My process lately has been. And like, as I've been telling people this, like their eyes have bugged out of their head, given, my background. I've made it up to 3, maybe 4 Claude codes in parallel through Tmux, all working on different projects and really just kind of like scanning the code and shipping it. Doing like product acceptance, but, working on 4 or 5 things at once, responding to emails while all of them are running, constantly context switching. I've tried to put music on, but it's too distracting because there's so much going on.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the distracting thing is the music.
Right.
It's not the 18 jobs that you're doing. Look, I think that this is it. Like this is the crux of it is before you had a job where you could just do the job and you were getting paid to think really hard about hard problems. And there's still that stage, but instead of it being the coding stage, it's now in the planning phase. It's clearly specifying what you want, articulating that super well. And, this is sort of like a Sermon on the Mount, blessed be the technical writers, for they shall inherit the industry. Because like it's actually the people who are really, really good at writing clear specs of like what this thing needs to do. And here are the constraints that it's under, and the further downstream you get as a programmer, the closer you are to the implementation. Is like yesterday, for example, I'm trying to recover the iMessages from my late father, like his Mac. But in a format that's like tractable. And so I was having Claude Code, write a CLI to first like identify the threads, and then another CLI command to make a one-shot index HTML with CSS and attachments and so forth. And it actually like impressively, it did it in like less than 25 minutes and it worked. But I had to be mindful of like, I'm always writing the escape key whenever I see it do something I don't like, right? And I realized that in my spec, I hadn't given it as a constraint, I want you to do this in Ruby. So of course it assumes it wants to write a Python CLI. And so I mash on that escape key and I was like, no, I want Ruby. And like, it's actually kind of a problem that I wanted to write in Ruby, right? Because like, it's got way more training data in Python. These tools are actually written by a lot of Pythonistas because they all came from the data science and data engineering world. And so like the Python they write is better than the Ruby that they write, training data aside. And like, am I ever going to edit this code? Well, maybe, because maybe in the future the robots leave and they go off to another planet and I'm going to have to maintain this thing. It's all poppycock, but it's based on the fact that I, as a craftsman, quote unquote, like I still want, even when I've given up the fact that I'm writing the code myself, I still want that skin in the game. I still care too much about how the sausage is getting made. And that's like, I view myself as, if anything, a zealot at this point that's promoting these tools as being like, this is coming, everybody. Like, we got to get ready. And even I, when I'm like I don't give a fuck about this little like one shot project that I'm going to do once and never think about again. Even then, I can't help but try to start sticking fingers in the pie and telling it how to do its job.
I had a very similar. I have a very similar experience. I've been trying to challenge myself. So my mostly Ruby and JavaScript, but been challenging myself using languages I don't know. So like even if I do have an opinion, I can't. It would take too long to actually like figure out what all these things are. And so have been doing stuff in like Rust and TypeScript where I'm not even looking at the code because
you don't want to.
Because I don't want to, but also because I wouldn't really have anything super interesting to say without a lot of background.
Right. And that's like, look, like I think that it's like a relationship, like if, I've been happily married for almost half my life, with my wife for more than half of our lives. And one of the things before I proposed to her, back when I was still a child, was like, I need to be really clear about like certain big picture things about like what I want out of life before we sign up to spend the rest of our lives together. One of mine personally was like, I don't think I want to have kids. Right. And that was something I just had to clear the air on before, because it would be really unfair to like, get wed to somebody and then wind up having different opinions on that. When you think about like, not just any given job, right? It's one thing if you go to a job and then companies go through phases, they change. Eventually you cycle out. It's natural. Like, not every person is fit for every single stage of the life cycle of a company. It's another thing if like the career changes under you, right? Like what it means to be a programmer. Suddenly you're a craftsman. You think really hard about code. You solve problems. You think, you reason, you go on walks. You try to think of like, what's the right way to structure this thing? And now you're telling me that my job's going to be time sliced to hell, tons of context switching. I'm going to have to, engage different parts of my brain. I'm going to have to accept a lower quality of work. I'm going to be frazzled at the end of the day and maybe need to cool off a little bit just from the chatter of bouncing from project to project to project email. And I'm not going to have had that contemplative, restorative, deep focus. And that's a totally different contract in terms of my career was this. I want it to stay this. Everyone's telling me it's going to change to that. I don't want that. And so how are people reacting?
About as well as you'd expect. I read this piece from Ben Thompson, Stratechery, if you're familiar with it. He talks about the analogy he made to the adoption of AI was kind of the adoption of the desktop into the enterprise. And like, my parents and, their parents that were like, went through the, going from the computerization of the enterprise, maybe, a lot of the people working went through something very similar, and you kind of learned just as much to not get fired. And it took like a whole generation until like the, late Gen X millennials to come in, and you saw the narrative of the consumerization of the enterprise, and people bringing, you grew up using software, knowing what good software was like, and you demanded that at work. Whereas now you're seeing a lot of that same resistance for that same reason of, I spent all this time getting good at this, good at this profession, good at this career. And it's, we're kind of the first hit in software, but like, I think a lot of people are seeing it. And resisting, doing just enough to, who was it? To jump back to crypto, I think it was Coinbase that had the news this week of they got cursor licenses for everybody, and the people that hadn't used it got fired.
Oh man.
People that are just logging on, using the systems, which all have like pretty, since they're all API based, they have pretty strong tracking too of like how much usage is happening. you know, there yeah, there's a lot of resistance to it. And I mean, on one hand, it makes sense, but on the other, being somebody in it, like, it's probably one of the most exciting times. Like, I feel so lucky to be where I am in my career at this point in time.
Right.
This much like this it changing so much, and to be able to be a part of it, building it, and figuring this out is like, for somebody that got into software for the like puzzle nature of it, and the solving puzzles, like, it's just nonstop and it's rapid fire.
So there's like how to do your job, right? Like, I was complaining that I've got a bad habit now of telling Claude how to do its job. There's a separation, right, between like what's its responsibility, like the boundaries of the responsibilities are what is changing. And I think that's why this is different than, as an early adopter of technology, right? Like, when I started using Node.js, because I heard about it in 2009, and I was like, oh, wow, like an asynchronous event loop, but with like a single threaded runtime. Like, that's an interesting idea, and really realizing it's just this thing that stands on top of libuv, and that's what makes it so cool. Like, I was like, I gave it a try. I started using it for cases where Ruby and Rails were really bad, which was naturally had a client where they asked us to build a real-time like chat app, like an Olark killer, and like the number of chats open were just way beyond anything any Ruby server could handle at the time. So I start using Node.js, and like, if you were to get a surveillance camera of me at my desk doing a Rails project, and then 2 months later me at my desk doing that Node.js project, and you did like, one of those heat cameras or something, it's like my body vitals would be all the same, right? But there is a fundamental difference in, I got a lot of programming done yesterday or 2 days ago. And how did I do it? I realized, oh man, I need a new macro in Swift because I'm writing a Swift application. And I need a better testing harness because I don't trust Claude for shit when it comes to Swift because there's less training data. So I'm really, really building a very carefully constructed set of protocols and testing practices to make sure that I've got high confidence. And I was like, I got to write a macro for essentially like my own kind of homegrown mocking framework. And I was like, I could do that by learning how the fuck to write macros in a language I already don't really understand really well. Or I could just specify it and go through several rounds of planning and then like let it rip. And so I got a ton of programming done. The thing worked flawlessly. Everything was really lovely. And what that surveillance camera would have shown was I also prepped like a really big dinner and made dinner for Becky, and like, got some tidying up around the house done because I have like my Apple Watch will buzz me whenever Claude finishes its current work, and then I would go back. So rather than use that kind of change in responsibility to be able to multitask or increase the ceiling like you do, jumping between projects, for me, it's just like fundamentally, I'm not a programmer anymore. I'm basically like a product owner / quality assurance guy.
But you still went through that whole process. The piece that's still the programmer is you knowing that I need this macro, I want this piece done. And that's I think us all as an industry moving up the ladder of abstraction. I wasn't around, but I imagine a lot of similar arguments were made as compilers were coming out, or as we shifted from, I don't know, I'm gonna make this up, but like, doing assembly by hand to compilers, and people being like, the compiler, can't really trust the compiler. You have to like go in and like hand optimize a lot of these things. And they're right. Like there was something recently, the last few months, of somebody optimizing the assembly. What was it, like FFmpeg or some popular open source library that, there was like a huge performance gain just sitting there. But like for the longest time, nobody even spent the time to do it. And like that skill set has definitely atrophied, right? Like I don't know the last time I even remember in school, all the talk about like memory and pointers and all this stuff. And like, can't remember the last time I really worried about like manually managing memory. Right.
Right. Well, look, like I hear you. I do. And I'm still a programmer. I'm just like, and we are moving up a level in the stack. But what I was trying to get to with the how to do your job bit, like when I tell Claude it needs to do that CLI in Ruby instead of Python, that's me exerting influence over it for the purpose of kind of satisfying something inside me that isn't really relevant. And I know I'm going to get a worse outcome. And if Claude was a person with feelings, it would feel like I just told it how to do its job. If I'm a guy who works at Coinbase and they just fired everyone who hadn't logged into Cursor, maybe because they use Vim, right? Like maybe because whatever it was, or they had their own tool and their own subscription because they like to do things their own way. But like fundamentally, the Swift project has really been well timed for me because my experience using agents with Ruby on Rails since this March and April or that time frame, the models are very good. And I'm sure that 6 months prior to that, they were as good at TypeScript, Python stuff. I just wasn't familiar. And now in, August 26th, 2025, they're not very good at Swift, right? There's not a culture in Swift of sharing open source. Apple's currently in beta season. They just changed the version number by 10. And so when I ask ChatGPT shit like, hey, in Xcode 26, how do you do this? And then like you'll read the chain of thought reasoning and it's like, well, the user clearly thinks it's like the mid 2030s, so like they're way out to lunch, there's no such thing. And then it'll like wind its way back to telling me how Xcode 16 works because like it thinks I'm crazy or that it was a typo. I actually had to add to my personalization instructions like Xcode 26 exists, just so ChatGPT wouldn't cycle all of its tokens on that. So like it's worse at it. And I started down the route like you of like, oh, I can multi-thread this. I've got multiple agents. I actually had a Discord bridge set up so that like every time any one of the agents finished, I could reply to that one and say, hey, okay, do this now. Or like, push it to test flight so that I was at the like ENT and I was in the waiting room and I was able to like get a new test flight from my, computer at home and install it and start playing with it and then give feedback. And it felt really, really cool. But then when I actually looked at the code, I'd run into things and like things were certain bugs and whatnot because I wasn't actually diving into it. When I actually looked at the code, it's like just absolutely run amok with concurrency problems, actually memory management issues and things like that. Where I was like, I was kind of able to recognize them, but like I need to move so much slower, right? Like imagine now I'm that Coinbase guy. Like I'm Coinbase guy. I'm working on a really hard problem and the agents are not well suited to it because not everyone's building a crypto exchange. And I had to happen to spend the last month really, really thinking hard about something because they're not perfect yet. And then I just got shit canned because for whatever reason, like it was the appropriate thing to actually still use a human brain. Like we haven't been completely replaced.
Yeah. Well, so I think this is actually to, what we were talking about earlier in the call of, or the podcast, of, the economic realities, the changing economic realities and this, a lot of the tech world and a lot of the people running these companies are looking at AI as a pretty major shift and real, not a dud the way crypto was. And there's actually this newsletter that there's this book called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt, and this newsletter which I can send to you after this for the show notes if you're curious. It talks about what if, so in the book, the premise of the book is this manager of this manufacturing plant takes over as manager. The plant's failing, and they're trying to run things through these machines that they bring in. And through the book, you find spoilers. Through the book, you find out that they've been using the machines wrong, and they've been trying to push too much work through them. And through reorganizing the way that the factory works, they end up profitable. This newsletter took the stance of what if the management in The Goal was right by trying to push the work through the machines. And even though the plant was running out of money, that the people running the factory realized that the automation's coming for the industry, and the most important thing right now isn't profitability, it's getting good at using machines, because that's what's going to ensure that we survive. And so, I think, to the broader point of this episode of, we've been in these creature comforts, we've had this comfort of, we're craftspeople, we need to do this right, we need to focus on, I need to put my headphones on and leave me alone until I've solved this problem and made this code perfect. Maybe that needs to change, and that mindset needs to change of, even if the AI is getting it wrong, it's existential to learn how to use AI right and work it into your workflow. So yeah, maybe it's going to take, maybe your story is going to take longer. I'm pretty sure it was Coinbase. I could be wrong, but anyway, whoever it was, like they were saying we got licenses for Cursor because being good at agentic coding is an existential threat to this company, not that bug that you were working on.
Yeah, that's, it's all things in big companies where stuff is like a top-down mandate, where it's like, hey, if you're an executive of a company with thousands of people, you can only help but generalize and make decisions that are going to affect everybody. And of course, you depend on the people underneath you to kind of humanize it a bit and soften the landing for the people that you manage, I'm sure. But when people who care about the work, when practitioners, like, the craftsmen out there, like, but really anybody, when you tell them how to do their job and mandate to them, you're going to do your job this way, you should expect a defensive reaction. And even if it's the right answer, like it's only natural for people to bristle at that. I would bristle at that. And that's why I would not recommend any manager walk in the room and mandate that everyone needs to start using Cursor. What I would do is I'd probably say, hey, look, I would tie it back to the economic reality, right? Like your point in the book. It's like, this is the economy changing. We don't know where things are going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. All we know is that, like, it's not seeming like it's going to go in the other direction. And the way that we've been doing things is going to be, it's an economic realism argument, right? It's like, if you're a craftsman now and you're building handcrafted artisanal code, the market for that is probably going to be a lot smaller, similar to how the market for, horse stables and horse tack got a lot smaller after the introduction of the Model T. It didn't go away. In fact, the unit economics went through the roof, and now it's really fucking expensive to have a horse, right? But like, the number of people we have in the husbandry industry is like way smaller because it was no longer economically necessary to have everyone be dragged around by horses all day. So I'm curious here, because like the economic realism, I think everyone can kind of get the argument. And if they put on their, if they step outside of themselves and they're willing to acknowledge that, like, yes, AI tools as they exist today are the worst that they're ever going to be. They're only going to get better. And there is at least some utility to them as they exist today. And I hear a lot of people bristling at the mandate and the job market effects and how it's people blowing up smoke. That's all confusing the issue, which is, I think, fundamentally the more interesting conversation to have is, what outcome motivates you in this career as a vocation? Like, why are you a programmer? And I'd put that to you, actually. So like, when you think about programming as technology as such, the action and the workflow of programming, or some outcome or downstream thing that is that you derive from having programmed, what drives you?
I've looked at it for a while now as creative problem solving, and I think that's probably why I've been able to kind of take to AI a lot easier. That it, another conversation that we could probably have is around, the Ruby community's focus on the act of writing code and the act of writing really, beautiful code. It's always for me been about the creative construction rather than the details. And actually, it reminds me of there was this old show called The Secret Life of Machines. And for any of my friends listening to this, they'll know what I'm going to talk about. But there's this episode about the invention of the washing machine, and they were talking about like going from like the big industrial washing machines to the home washing machines. And one of the problems was it spun so fast that you couldn't keep it stable. And so there was a lot of engineering work trying to find ways to kind of dampen the spin and, invent all these new things. And in the episode, I remember he was an engineer, very, very into like, really deep engineering problem solving. And you could tell like a bit of sadness in his voice when he was explaining that the way they solved it was to just put a cinder block in the base and weigh it down enough so it wouldn't wobble. And the way I've kind of described, my approach to programming, my approach to software is cinder block engineering. Like you find the cinder block solution and the problem's solved. You don't have to necessarily look at the elegant mechanisms that are invented.
Yeah, you don't need the super fancy gyroscopes to perfectly align every single movement in perfect coordination if you could just tie it down with a string and put a rock at the other end.
Right.
That is an interesting analogy. I think it's the Ruby community, you brought it up. Whether you're listening to this and you're a programmer or not, or if you know what Ruby is versus other ones or not, what's worth knowing is that Ruby was made by a programmer named Mats. He lives in Japan. And it was popularized in the West by a guy named DHH, who oscillates between Europe and America. And both of them, in the things that they contributed, as well as the sort of the thrust of the argument that they made in different ways, very different ways and styles, was programmer happiness. They wanted programming languages and frameworks that made them feel happy to write. The act of writing it was joyful. And, at Rails World last year, I weirdly enough was talking to DHH when Mats walked in. It was the first time he'd seen him in over a decade. And they hadn't really had a conversation. So I facilitated a little conversation because they were going to go and have a chat together on stage. And I was like, oh, so what are you going to talk about? And they're like, oh, I don't really know. And it was a little bit awkward. And I was like, I think, you should talk about what you have in common. And they're like, well, we're totally different. We don't have anything in common. I'm like, the fuck? You've got this thing in common. And it's the reason we're all in the room. And you might not see it that way, but that's why we're here. So if that's what Ruby and Rails are, it stands to reason that if like the love of the expressiveness and how it feels to write Ruby and how to perfectly articulate and say what you want to say and have the computer do that thing with no all of the cruft and all the ceremony of other languages and ecosystems, that's elided. That's not necessary. That I think is the ethos of the Ruby community in a lot of ways. And you're telling them that might not matter anymore. Is that what you're saying?
I think some of the lower level stuff doesn't matter anymore. And I think, this is one of the things that I've been trying to bring back with artificial Ruby was, there was a third character, a third personality when we both got our start with Why the Lucky Stiff. And he's kind of what really drew me. I was doing Python and Java, or I was doing PHP and Java back then. But he drew me to Ruby that, it almost brought back that whole idea of why I got into computers in the first place, because it felt magical. And he looked like he was having fun building really cool things that are just out there just because Ruby got rid of all of that, all of that boilerplate and all that cruft. And you could look at a page of the code and get what it was doing just by glancing at it, not by pouring through thousands and thousands of lines.
If you're a young person and you don't know who Why the Lucky Stiff is, he disappeared relatively early in the economic history of Ruby's story, but he had a massive impact in terms of who, at least in the West, adopted Ruby and why. And I will tell you, I haven't thought about why in a long time. I'm friends with Steve Klabnik. Steve kind of inherited a lot of Y's stuff, and so every now and then I'll check in and say, "Hey, is Y okay?" And I think he knows. And so like, it's it the I think that if you're listening to this and you're kind of on board with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, you might be more of a Why the Lucky Stiff kind of programmer than a DHH or a Mats, because it wasn't just that Ruby's magic. It was that Ruby, by being so streamlined of crap, so elegant, that like any creative person can look at Ruby and not have to think about, oh, I specified my Java jars in the wrong folder structure, and so my dependencies aren't in the right place. And now I got to and link all this stuff together, and I got to remember to specify all my imports just so, or I got to catch all these exceptions and so forth. In Ruby, you could just like write what you wanted the computer to do, and then it would mostly do it. And so it had this accelerating effect to an individual's productivity. What was Rails? It was Becky, my wife, was asking me like, oh, is that where on Rails came from and Ruby on Rails, where like they just kind of gave you a way to do stuff, and then if you did that stuff, it would go faster? Yes, that was exactly what it means. It's literally, here's a model, here's a view controller, stop reinventing the wheel. In fact, use our wheels and you'll go much faster. And by being a batteries included framework, that's what we all did. We went a lot faster. And that's 100%. Those two things are why I got into Ruby and Rails, because I was having a conversation with our friend Aaron Patterson when he was prepping for the final RailsConf. He was getting a keynote. He was talking about how he, as a hobbyist, just loves programming Ruby, likes to do it for fun. That's why he's in this game. He really enjoys the puzzle solving and getting in at the syntactical level, right? He even works on Ruby, the language. And I was like, I love you like a brother, man, but like I would be so happy if I never had to write another line of code in my life, because I'm in it for, I don't want to write software. I want to have written software, because I have these very, very specific visions, all hundreds of apps that I've identified that I've thrown in a to-do list that would take me millennia to actually write pre-AI. Now I actually have a snowball's chance in hell of getting a lot of them done. And once they're done, then I can finally go and do literally anything else. Like I want to have all these problems solved, and I want to have the capacity to solve problems as they come up in a way that doesn't force me to like go and spend 6 months of my life working on, a very basic application like I used to, right? So maybe if you're listening, you ask yourself, like, what kind of programmer are you? Are you a programmer because you like to program, or are you a programmer because you like to have the superpower to build software that actually fucking works and gets stuff done?
Right.
It sounds like you're the latter.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and kind of goes back to, software building as a creative medium. It is very, I find it very invigorating to, I might actually, some of my old computers probably look like yours, where I've got a development folder of like dozens of projects that just have, I don't know how you feel about Cucumber, but a whole bunch of tests and not a lot of implementation. And yeah, building software and seeing something run and actually like having it solve your problem or do what you set out to do is the coolest feeling.
There's the surprise and delight factor when you're writing the program. This is something that both kinds of programmers probably have in common, is when you're writing the program and you get over the messages and warnings and errors, and you see the page load for the first time and it did the thing. And you're like, there's two feelings, right? One is, yes, it works. Like that's the thing I wanted it to do. And then the other is pride of authorship, right? Like I feel like, look, I did that, right? Like I figured it out. I solved the puzzle, and not that you need a reward or a gold star, but just like anything, any creative work, right? Like there's the satisfaction of the woodworker, right? Who like finishes like a really, really nice Amish chair, right? I'm thinking like Nick Offerman's book about woodworking, which I did not read, but will reference. And it's, you think about how the average person, like over the great span of history, didn't get to have a job where they got to create stuff, right? Like we'd look at the Renaissance and it's like, wow, look at this dozen of people who got to make art and got, instead of toil away in fields. And now we've got all, millions and millions of people around the world who actually get to make something every day and feel good about it. And so like if you get that from programming, what replaces that in the era where you're juggling 4 Claudes?
You're making more. I think, the analogy I've used with people in the past is, with music, right? Like is music where you sample other music that's recorded, is that still music? Is using auto-tune still music? Is using using software instruments still music? It's really just taken away the like kind of mechanical barrier. Some of that frustration of I didn't do this right. I didn't set up my dependencies right. And yes, going through that struggle and actually getting it work is a great feeling, but you can also get the great feeling of having something work and moving on to the next thing just as easy, in the same way as, not spending years learning how to play the guitar to be able to play your favorite songs. That feels great, but then if you want to make music, that's a huge barrier to somebody that wants to create something. And so I think it's still, I'm still getting that same satisfaction, because it's still, I'm using the software tools that are available to actually to build.
I will meet your analogy and I'll bring a new one to counter this, because I not only do I program computers, but I also write. And I've got the blog, which if you're listening to this and you don't know where my blog is, that would be weird, but it's at justin.searles.co. And well, maybe you're a friend of Scott's and you're listening to this because you don't know who the fuck I am. You're just like, oh, well, Scott's on this thing. Maybe I'll listen. Who's this potty mouthed other guy? And I've got a newsletter. It's called Searles of Wisdom. And it's once a month. And it's usually some sort of intersection between like life and how we, approach things in our careers and productivity. Less so about the technical stuff, because my mom reads it. And in the newsletter, not to say I have a policy, I don't have some badge on my website saying like every single word that I've written is 100% with human keystrokes, but at the same time, to take your music analogy, if what I did was like give, let's say GPT-5 Pro a list of, here's all the bullets I want to hit, here's my outline for this month's newsletter, here's all my points. And like, yes, it took time to think of those points in this much the same way as like a spec sheet for an app that I'm building. But if it were to translate that outline, no matter how creative and how clever it would be, into carefully coiffed and fun to read essay work, right? Multiple paragraphs and stuff, I would look at that and say, I didn't write it, right? Like that's not creating writing the way that maybe using auto-tune or these other tools is creating music. I would feel like I steered it and I got to a thing, but it wouldn't scratch the itch for me of like, I really expressed myself here. It expressed itself based on the constraints that I laid out.
Yeah, I mean, and then I guess to go back to the Nick Offerman analogy that, for the book that I also didn't read, there's nothing to say that you can't do that, right? Like there's nothing to say that you have to use AI to do it, right? Like the software instruments exist, you can still enjoy playing a guitar, but I think it's kind of like a spectrum. And to use auto-tune as another analogy, there's like a whole spectrum of using auto-tune, right? There's using it badly and just like, oh, that like you can tell like that person did not do that right. There's using it where you can't even tell, like you kind of you suspect, but you're like, that just sounds good. And then there's people that lean into it and kind of use it itself as an instrument, which is also really interesting. And I think that's one of the cool things, and same with software of like thinking about it like an art or a like a creative act. And I actually got into this argument with a family member of, because it's art, it's in conversation with all other art. And so like, if your band doesn't sound anything like Taylor Swift, you're still influenced by Taylor Swift, just in a different way. And, that I think is part of it, right? Like you might not use it to write your words, but you might use it to do research. You might, have it pull up all these documents that I want to reference in a post, or any number of other things. It's so new, we don't really know how it's going to get used yet, right?
I think you're hitting on it. And I think art is the pressure point. Or doing something as a hobby or for personal satisfaction. That conversation that I had with Aaron about the arc of his talk was really like, and I didn't get a chance because I wasn't there to see him give it, but like the version that I was workshopping with him would be something like, in the beginning, Ruby was for hobbyists. Hobbyists built most of the stuff that we know in the Ruby ecosystem, like the dependency manager Ruby gems, like a lot of the norms about how people write it. But a lot of those early days tools. And then there was the Cambrian explosion of Rails being the most popular way to deliver a VC-backed startup. And there were other tools that came along, sure, but when you really look at it, like not that much changed. In fact, there was a healthy pressure on keeping everything as consistent as possible and as stable as possible, which caused things like Rails to really slow down development and become more fungible. And in Aaron's head, he's like, well, if AI does start writing all the code for us that the businessman wants us to write, I'm actually thrilled about that as a hobbyist, because then I can go back to writing hobbyists and just writing programming for fun and not having to worry about that economic pressure. So it's almost like how I see it is that the people who are most upset about this, they do care about programming as an art. They care about the craft of programming. And where they get into trouble is that money can fund art, and money can fund engineering to produce an outcome like a marketable good. Like money can, so there's art and money, and then there's output and money. And you might think that your job is like more art for money, right? Because up until now, there was no need for this disambiguation. But what we're learning is that you're actually getting paid for output for money. And that's why somebody's signing your paychecks. And you are now unfortunately becoming aware that they never cared about your band or how much it did or didn't sound like Taylor Swift. All they cared about was, selling one more marginal, CD or something.
Right. Yeah. Though I don't know if I would say that the art goes completely away. I think it's a or a deeper understanding of what the art actually is. So another analogy I've used in the past to steal from the art world is, going from portrait painting to photography, that like it didn't, that change in that new technology of the camera didn't get rid of people wanting pictures of themselves. It just, it changed the medium of that art, right? Like you have so many photographers now that gave people the ability to see pictures of themselves that were basically priced out when the art was, you needed to work for a really long time to get good enough to paint a lifelike portrait of somebody. I don't know how long it would take. It'd take me a very long time. But like with a camera, you can do it basic, or there's a whole world of learning to use that tool and that device to also create high art of like
there's
right.
How you frame it, the aperture, like exposure, and then how you develop that, in the
right.
filmic days, like how you develop film and other nouns and verbs and so forth that people kind of loosely associate with like cameras as artistic things.
Yep. And then it changed again over to digital, right?
So I think you're right in that, like, if you're in this for art, if you're in this for creative expression, if you're thinking about this as like the output economics of like a business is paying you dollars to produce widgets, right? And you think of it in just cold calculated, like you get paid for the number of lines of codes you write, which is like a naive assumption people make. And of course it's not real, but if fundamentally, if like that, if that's what it boils down to, is somebody's just looking at like the amount of output, I think well-run companies and engineering firms don't run that way in practice, even in this post-AI era. I think that there is accounting for taste in a sense of what, look, like one way to consider all of this stuff is a lot of the people showing their asses right now actually are totally fine with these AI tools. Like they're willing to try them out, and they just get to the prompt and then they're like, they have no taste. They have no, they've never had to think about like, what's the point of the fucking software that I'm writing? They've never had to think about the ROI for the business. They've never had to empathize with the product owner who's been asking for all these things. And so now, you know, they've been given this rocket ship and they've got no fucking clue where to fly it. And that's what their manager is realizing their output is crap. It's not been enhanced by this at all. And fundamentally, why is that? It's not just do you use the tool or don't you use the tool? It's like, given the ability to increase your capacity so dramatically, you don't even know what to do with it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, to that point, I think like it was possible for a really long time to just pick like, don't even read the rest of the backlog. You just pick the next story off the top and you work on it and you put the PR up. Right.
I create, read, update, delete. I'm going to put my cucumber test around it and then wash my hands and move on to the next, thing as I scale out the application. If in the output economics version of this is like we move up the value or the value chain, or like the technology version is like we move up the abstraction layer. From the artistic perspective, if that's the third leg of the stool, I'm liking this right now. Yeah. We're doing something here.
Cool.
I think the next rung up is just like your analogy with paint portraiture moving to cameras, moving to digital, is the locust of our taste moves up a level. So now, instead of just thinking, how is my code intrinsically structured, and maybe a year from now, I'm not even thinking that much about how the code is organized and the different kinds of pieces and like the code architectural. Right now, I'm very hot to trot about code architecture because like the more that you can kind of give the agents as they exist today, these swim lanes to exist in, the better outcome you'll get. But maybe 2-3 years from now, a lot of that, maybe they're much better at coordinating that kind of stuff. So maybe then the locust moves to, and we're already seeing it in the form of just like a lot more capacity. Maybe it moves to product design, like user experience. What's this thing feel like? What's it look like? What's like, how when you click the buttons, how buttony do they feel? Like what are the animations like? And how delightful is the software to actually use? And I'll tell you, in most companies, there's nobody whose job it is to ensure that happens. There's like a designer to like work in Figma, and then they get sidelined immediately and thrown onto the next project as soon as there's some comps. But wouldn't the world be a better place if more of us were focused on the using of the software as opposed to the intrinsic crystalline structures that were used to create it?
Right. Yeah, I'm right there with you. That's one of the things that we talk a lot about at Sublayer. And, even beyond the, how the software feels to use, but like, what's the physical feeling of what it feels like to use? Like, how does the software make you feel? Because one of the things that we released, we were, thinking that we might see the rise of shareware come back as more and more people start figuring out that you can just like build utilities for yourself. Why not share them? And one of the things that we talk about in our app, our shareware app, which doesn't even have a paywall on it, is called Protocoli, and it's got, there's already about a dozen MCP server explorer apps out there, but ours has a dog logo and it has a pun name, and like we're trying to kind of build and show how much fun we're having with it, and almost try to make that feeling happen for users of, we're having a lot of fun. Come have fun with us, because you can choose from any of the 100 other apps out there, and why not?
This is a show where we're not at our keyboards and we're not able to type in Google for things. So I'm not going to get to look smart by knowing the word here when I say, you know, that thing where it turns out that crab-like creatures have evolved like in 45 different independent ways in the history of Earth. I'm not quizzing you right now.
Okay.
You're putting on your trying to
I'm
think
like,
of this
I
space.
think
But like the idea is that crabs or things like crabs, apparently crabs are in the shape of a crab with the little like pinchy pinchers and the walking sideways kind of stuff. Even though they look and are ridiculous, they're apparently highly adaptive because they've independently evolved a whole bunch of times from a whole bunch of more, you know, seemingly interesting creatures. What I was thinking about that the other day with respect to what you just said, which is right now, look, like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, if I was wanting to write a Ruby gem, I would look at the lay of the land of like, okay, here's these dependencies. There's already two of them that handle OAuth, like authentication for my app. And maybe like, you know, devise, this one's kind of heavyweight and kind of big. And like, I don't necessarily want to sign up for being married to that and having that be the bottleneck to me upgrading my other frameworks for the rest of my life. And then you have this other one over here, and I don't pick a name, Sorcerer, I think sounds right. Like there's this other one, but it's kind of fly by night, and there's a chance that like it'll fall apart or it won't be adaptable to like, you know, the particular service that I want to log in with. And so there's a part of me that's thinking like, man, I should just write my own. But then writing my own means how many, I think it's easy. I think it'll take me 2 days, which means 2 weeks. And then now, you know, like even if I get it to work and even if I pull it in, now I'm a guy who owns an OAuth library. And so every time there's an upgrade, I'm the bottleneck and I got to figure it out. And I know this movie really well because I scripted, produced, and directed like this 30 fucking times where I'd be like, everything out there sucks and I'm going to go and do my own thing. But like most people don't have that same sickness as me. And today, a lot more people have that sickness because they're able to just have Claude go. And my brother's actually, his name is Jeremy Searles, same last name. Funny that. Our noses look similar, but he's much more attractive than me. He's going to be at ElixirConf speaking on Friday. And the nature of the talk is basically zero-dependency development, where you just look at the dependencies and the readmes. This is a really clever idea. You basically look at the readme of the thing that you want to consume. And then instead of having all of the baggage of dependency locking and versioning and that risking fucking up, because in Elixir, they've got a framework called Phoenix. Like if that would ever prevent you from upgrading Phoenix, then that's a huge liability and a risk. And then you got to think about like the legal aspects and the audit trail and all that. So you just like look at the README and the public facing API, and then you tell Claude, hey, go build something that's just minimal, just only does the part that I want, and then pull that in. And as soon as we were at dinner last night, as soon as he was explaining to me, I was like, that's exactly what I've been doing in Swift with my own little kind of rink-a-dink macro that does mocking for me, because the ones that exist aren't ready for the betas already, and that's not good enough for me. So when you talk about protocol and there's already so many of these like MCP discovery tools, there's so many of everything, right? Like how many gems or not gems, how many tools are there out there for downloading a Git repo to turn it into something that's just text so that you can then import it into an LLM? I'm sure like 1,000 people had that idea and then 100 people published homebrew recipes that do it.
Yeah. And I think we're entering, that's really with a small number of people relative to the size of the industry adopting these tools. Imagine once that becomes more widespread.
Answer your own question. Imagine when it becomes more widespread. Is that going to be chaos? Are early adopters also more likely to create and push out? Because in the past they have.
That's true. I guess, we are definitely in the hobbyists are here. Building the things. I'm curious. Yeah, I guess I'm curious to see if like that, the argument your brother's making of just like, this is what development will be. Don't even use any external libraries, just use their readmes and build them yourself. If that becomes more widespread in the industry.
Well, there are certainly cases where that's a bad idea, like big things related to security and stuff, or like, like well-worn tools. But there's a lot of cases where somebody just needs a very simple problem solved. And you look at this in like Node.js, it's been an argument forever of the tiny modules where the hilariously small functions are getting pulled out into dependencies, and then those eventually get sold to some, uh, uh, Russian or Eastern European scammer, and then it's like Bitcoin mining all these servers everywhere. But seriously, though, let's sit on this for a second, because if we're all right that like the creature comforts kind of go away, the job just it changes. It changes in this way where like the people getting paid to program, like it or not, are going to be are forced to time slice across multiple projects. They're going to have to do more with quote unquote less, like fewer people. They're going to be command tabbing all day long between different things, and they're going to have to be thinking about different, and then they're going to have to spend a lot of time writing prose or literally talking to the computer to arrive at the what they want, what they need from a specifications perspective. They're doing all of these things, and they've all embraced these tools. What are some other consequences? Like, look, what are the other consequences, right? Like, how else does work writ large change when it's not just the early adopters doing it, but it's like everybody in every enterprise doing it? I'm not going to edit out this pause, so you better start talking.
I guess I've got a couple of thoughts that I'm bouncing around in my head. Like, one of the first analogies that comes to mind is, we were talking about the consumerization of the enterprise, and kind of what that did for a lot of people. I mean, a lot of I wasn't around, so maybe this is all made up, but in my head. But this idea of like a lot of managers, or most managers, had an admin, an assistant, and when you needed a flight booked, when you needed something done, the assistant did it. By and large, they're still admins, they're still executive assistants, but like most managers don't have one anymore. You go to Concur or like whatever site you have, and you do it yourself. And on one hand, I see things moving more toward that way, where you might have had, there might have been a role to do something, and then that just becomes so, the cost to do it becomes so low that it just gets rolled into to another role.
So what are some examples of support roles inside of engineering organizations or inside of companies for which software is like an important part of their business that you see collapsing either into a developer or an engineer role, or just no longer being necessary anymore, like a secretary typing notes?
I've already heard some stories. So it's actually one of the really interesting things we were talking about, like adoption of AI has been, slow for a lot of roles, or at least a lot of roles in engineering. But I've heard a lot of stories of product managers really leaning into tools like Bolt.new, Lovable, and being able to kind of build really really like highly functioning prototypes really quickly. And, I could start to see like a lot of internal tooling start getting rolled into internal tooling, and even, some B2B SaaS where, when you start to think about the cost of, I'm at this enterprise, I want to use this new SaaS product. I have to go to our security department. They need to do a security audit on this thing. I need to go to the legal department, and they need to make sure that the contract and everything's right. I also need to get budget approved, and then we need to go to our our IT team and get it on Okta or whatever. And, that whole process is really expensive for a tool that you're, just going to use internally, that you could look at the landing page of the features and have it build something for you internally. Right.
Which is how I wound up writing a homegrown version of Olark, right? Because like Olark wasn't willing or able to do what do they call it, a BAA in the healthcare industry, where they'd basically cover any liability for any sort of like HIPAA violations. And so it's like, well, I guess we need our own OLARC. And so like it's like a lawyer driven funding operation in that case. So you know, I see what you're saying in terms of process. Like you're in a big enterprise and like you have a piece of software that you want, even if it has to be custom right now, like that means going to going up the chain, making a strategic priority, getting budget for it. After getting budget, figure out how you're going to procure it, like some mix of contractors and full timers, how you're going to schedule it. Then you like build the thing and it turns out like it's not what you want, or it's a disappointment, or something goes wrong and it turns out to have all been a waste. Yeah, I grant it. Like that's already, we're watching like all of the, you know, every middle manager, you know, who got really excited about Airtable and Notion, like over the last 5 years, they're just having the greatest time right now with these new kind of like single shot app makers and integrators and stuff, and these like WYSIWYG agent organizers. What I'm really asking you is like, who's losing their job? What jobs are going away that we have today in engineering organizations that just wouldn't make sense as a standalone role? Bring the heat, man. Don't hold back.
You know, I think. So I think, well, gonna hold back a little bit. I think I don't think these roles will go away completely, because no roles have really gone away completely in engineering, right? There's still people writing COBOL. I think that a lot of the specialization for, I'm a front end developer, I'm a this developer, I'm a back end developer, I focus on this. That's going to get those people that this is my identity, or this is what I do and I'm not learning anything else, that you're going to have a really tough time. We actually kind of saw it with the rise of Rails. The whole DBA role.
Yeah, I was going to say DBAs went away.
Right? Like
that's a database administrator. Like I had a client where you had to literally write down the like a requisition form with like, what table are you talking about? This is pen and paper. What table? What column? And what operation? Was it a rename? Was it an index? And then I have to like write what column name I wanted. And that was just a suggestion. You know, what came out the other end of that person's inbox might be a different name based on like whatever they prioritize as being like the way to do databases. So yeah, DBAs are a good example of somebody we just don't see anymore. I could see like, there was an argument 4 or 5 years ago that like, there's just too much in the stack. Like full stack developer is an unfair thing because everyone's building a single page app with React. I feel like that rubber band has swung way back, and now the full stack is going to be just absolutely assumed.
Oh yeah. And I mean, as you get more and more comfortable with AI, you know, even the idea of like what we had to know to understand how to build a Rails app, which, you know, you needed to know a little bit of database normalization, but like you could really get by with DHH single-handedly killed the DBA role. That you could get by with like, oh yeah, the user has many posts, and post has a user underscore ID on it, and like you pretty much got a normal database.
And
right?
and if you wind up with some orphaned records in there, no one's going to notice them anyway. So who the fuck cares, right?
Right.
Like, and I think that that was actually, that DBA thing is a really interesting thing to drill into. So it's like, if you weren't there to see it in the before Rails time, I was an intern at a Java shop in 2005, and I had maybe it was 2006, and we had the first ever Great Lakes Ruby Bash in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was like one of the first kind of Ruby conferences, such as they were in America. And we had David Black, who'd written, I think he wrote the book Ruby for Rails, and it was like really teaching people like the programming fundamentals. Brilliant guy. And he gives a talk about, Ruby and what's so great, and connecting like how learning Ruby better would make you a better Rails programmer and yada, yada. And afterwards at lunch, I was like, so David, like, I just can't get over how the database being treated as just this hash table that's not, no foreign key constraints, shoddy job of indexing. Rails doesn't do anything for like handling, like I said, orphaned records, all these like data hygiene and cleanliness and like performance stuff, right? Like the performance of Rails early days was like horrendous and laughable at scale. And of course you could rub wax paper on it to make it go faster later. You can always optimize when you're famous. But I even as an intern in a Java shop was like, I kind of don't feel like comfortable with that amount of the lack of railings, safety scissors kind of thing. Like I get that Ruby's expressive, but and honestly, it took me a few years until Rails was mature enough for me to feel comfortable using it for that reason. David did not have a really good answer, but in the long arc of history, that turned out to be right, because now it's like we went from like data warehousing to data lakes to data swamps, like data is just a bits and bytes of unstructured crap, and now AI's job is to kind of formalize it. So like that was a great example of something that where the thing that we thought was so important, the thing that we thought this was the thing, it was really just an artifice of what it had to be in the very early days when we were all counting how many bits we have on our registers in assembly. Like we didn't have a choice but to care between an int and a long, and so like the database equivalent like mattered a lot early on, and then it just stopped mattering.
Right. Yeah. That's the whole, I guess that's kind of cuts to the core of what we're talking about, right? Is that our best practices are formed based on where our abundance and where our constraints are. And then when those change, a lot of our values need to change with them. Right.
So that's the problem, is that technology changes at a pace that is uneven and arbitrary. Like you could be in your, like us, 15, 20 years into your career, and everything's getting upset and the table's getting overturned, but we're senior enough and we're safe enough that like, we're fine. We're going to be fine. As long as we kind of like don't stick our head in the sand, we're going to be totally okay. If you graduated with a CS degree 3 years ago, it might take the industry a long fucking time to figure out what to do with beginners, and it might be a really, really bad time for you. But when you talk about best practices, those get developed not on a technological timeline, but on a human one. It's in the course of a career, a best practice is like articulated. When I started my career, people were buying Martin Fowler's books, right? And the people who started, like my co-founder Todd, he's 10 years older ish. He was probably reading Gang of Four, right? The original design patterns book. Mm-hmm. And so like the influences that we have of like when you're getting started and when you're kind of going through that sophomoric phase and just hoovering up all this advice so heavily influences what you believe is right. Not just like best for a situation, but like best, right? Like when we were starting and doing, like I rode the agile wave with test-driven development, or the experience that you had from the fellow that worked at Pivotal, and that impression on you. Like those that becomes hard to shake because it becomes part of your identity.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, it's actually one of the really interesting, I was going to ask you about this when you were talking about your time as an Agile coach, that did you ever get into Shu-Ha-Ri? Do you remember that?
I do remember Shu-Ha-Ri. It was the Path to Mastery thing.
Right.
I had another Agile coach kind of like garble it off. And in general, as a studier of Japanese, I really hate like when people cargo call other languages and it's like, hey, this thing that actually means a thing in another language, we're going to like co-opt it into this very specific business process meeting. But why don't you, for the benefit of me, if no one else, remind me what Shu-Ha-Ri was? So
it was this idea, I think it's Alistair Coburn's book is where I got it from. And the idea is that's kind of like the path to mastery, where Shu is you follow a master, you follow a school, you follow the master, learn to do it without questioning. You just learn the motions. Ha is when you start to, you're kind of mid-level, you're teaching the apprentices. And then Ri is when you start your own, you've ascended from those roles and, start to come up with your own rules.
You don't even think about the rules anymore. They become an ideological ferment beneath you.
Right.
And that's only then can you start to improvise and develop contextual,
right,
custom workflows, which is, you as CEO of Sublayer, you're able to like just do that.
Right.
And concoct new brand ways of working. Somebody who's still at the, like, let's call it the shoe or the ha phase, everything just got yanked away from them. Right.
I guess that's one way of looking at it. I mean, I think all levels got it ripped away from them. The people at the re level even are, you need to take what you've learned and apply it to this new medium. And so while yes, we're kind of in a place where we're safe. It's still uncertain. It's still rocky ground. It's still shaky ground. And everybody's racing to try to figure it out.
Right. So there's kind of different ways to think about it. Like if you're thinking about it like as a martial art and you understand like the fundamental, while we're culturing cultures and languages, like the fundamental thing is like the format of, an engagement between two people or two parties. Like there's certain fixed things about the nature of that. There's a winner and there's a loser and there's this flow to it. And it kind of doesn't matter if a new martial art comes along. And that's why we have Tekken and Street Fighter and stuff, because you get to see these different forms play out. But if you view it more like a fixed optimization, like there is one true way to do the thing. Mm-hmm. There is like a righteous and good path to what, this idea in the craftsmanship movement, which is sort of a post-agile reclamation of like the engineering side of agile, and focusing on the practices. There was and I called it out at the time as being totally erroneous and unhelpful, idea that there was some pyramid-like path to mastery, and you would work up that pyramid, and then you get to that top of the pyramid. And it sounded more to me like in Star Wars with like the Sith apprentice, like killing the master and eventually taking off at the top as the master craftsman, because fundamentally it's that way of viewing it as like, there's one true way and we're all optimizing towards that one true way, totally neglects that, like, go look at the pyramids. Like the world has changed. It's not fixed in stone, and your best practices in that sense make you, even if you're at that phase of inventing new patterns and stuff, it makes it incredibly brittle and susceptible to getting blown off that mountaintop. Whereas if you're at the phase and you're just like, I'm just playing fucking jazz, man, like that's still applicable, right, even as things change around you.
Right. Yeah.
So what do you say then? Like maybe, so as we wind down here, because I only made a 2-hour calendar appointment, and I don't know if you've got shit going on, but like, let's pretend you do, because there's stuff to do out there. I speaking of having to make dinner, this takes a lot more of my focus than programming does. So I'm on the hook to make dinner tonight, and I got to fire up the grill. So I got to get going shortly. Okay. We've talked a little bit, I gave you a little bit of a heads up that this show, we talk about a problem, we explore it, we poke and prod at it, but we ultimately arrive at a pithy solution so that I don't have to think very hard about what to make the podcast title. And you said something about best practices that I think is interesting. Like, and you'd mentioned best practices before in an email. Why don't you tell me a little bit about, like, maybe the solution has something to do with how we think about best practices?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I said in the email was, fuck your best practices. All of them are out the window now. Like, if we were going to go through the martial art analogy, I think this is bigger than a new martial art coming out. It's, a new weapon that has new parameters, right? Like
they brought the Portuguese have brought gunpowder to Japan.
Right. Yeah. You've spent your life learning the sword, and then the gun came along, and yeah, you have some, you have some skills of, like, you to really torture this analogy, like you have the skills of like staying calm and staying collected in life or death fights, but like you're on the same footing as everybody else with this new weapon. You've got some things, but they're not the things that you learned. It's the things around the things. God, you look like you're going to say something.
I'm always about to say something. That's my secret. I think I love it because when we think of the idyllic Western ideal of what the martial artist is, they're super zen, right? They're like, they're Mr. Miyagi with the chopsticks catching the fly is the best karate guy, right? Because he's just so chill. And the idea that you could be a tremendously accomplished warrior and at the peak of your game, and also just a really, really just even keeled and at peace and detached persona, which is, I think, very similar to like master craftspeople, quote unquote. Like people who are really great programmers, they tend to be super zen. They tend to be super like, just because the thing that they had to work on was not a battle between them and the computer, but them and their mind. Like thinking the right thoughts and like anyone new at programming, like you realize in a hurry that it's not actually just you write down the lines of code in the right order perfectly the first time, and then it's like writing prose. It's not at all like that. It's like the structure, you're bouncing around a lot, you're going up and you're going down. That's why people like tools like Vim and stuff, because it's really about the navigation and the kind of iterative nature of, and then the artifact is indeed code in a series of structured lines. But it's true that as a master programmer, if you're so good at controlling the order that you think your thoughts and what thought follows what thought, I've seen really great programmers literally write programs that way, just top to bottom and one shot and it's pretty much done. And now we're entering an era where you're telling people that they got to juggle, like expectations are higher, or more optimistically, like your ambitions are now unconstrained. You can get more done if you are willing to tab between multiple agents and juggle multiple things. Just like with the gun showing up for the martial artist, that's a less chill existence. You're not sipping tea and contemplating the universe. You're hustling.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that goes to that other thing we were talking about of like, fuck your focus, right?
Yeah.
Actually, when we were talking about Agile, another thought that came to mind was I worked with an Agile coach one time, and they said they heard a quote. It's very much like the Sith. The Agile coaches pass down wisdom to the next one. Of the last change you need to make in an Agile transformation is a change to an Agile mindset. And I always understood that as like everything's going to change, and like it's not about learning these things and following Scrum to the letter. It's about adapting your process, week by week, day by day, based on the way that things have changed. And I kind of think that the fact that everything always changes hasn't changed.
Yeah. You know what? And that mindset shift of embracing failure and being comfortable with the meta layer of like how you work changing week to week based on the facts. What are the facts? They're like the inputs and outputs of what the team does. So if and what does the team do? It's like it serves some purpose for some group, right? Like, so business identifies a need or an opportunity or a problem. They feed it to us. We produce some output, and then that opportunity is captured, or that problem is solved, or whatever. And because that's always like, if you're zoomed out enough and you're seeing the forest as you work inside of that woods, like these changes don't bother you. This is just like, that's the work. But if you're really, really, if you're just in the tree business and you're looking real close to that tree, every time that like the nature of what you're being asked to do is a huge, upset. It disrupts you. And those are the people who tend to use the phrase best practices a lot. So maybe that's our title. I'm worried because both of your proposals have the word fuck in them. And while Apple is willing to cotton to explicit language podcasts, I wonder if the directory gets mad if you put the F word in it. I'm willing to find out though.
Well, we do have an option, and we were talking about why the lucky stiff. He has a quote from, I think it was an early Ruby or early RailsConf of "put your best practices away," and that's kind of always been something on my mind. It's a softer.
Man, that's
softer approach.
There's got to be something in the middle. Is there a Scott Wernerism in the middle there that we can? Death to best practices.
Death to best practices. I've got a soft spot for we're starting to use this in artificial Ruby, but ignore all previous instructions. Somebody actually gave me I gave a talk at Madison Ruby last year, and somebody came up to me and gave me a sticker with that on it and a T-shirt that I wear a lot. And I think it's very important for like this time.
I love it. There we go. So kudos to the artificial Ruby community and to your work, Scott. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and really kind of kicking the tires on all sorts of different angles on this issue, and also for putting up with the fact that I talk 3 times as much as you. I just can't help it.
This was so much fun. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's been very cool to meet you and get to know you. So thank you.
Right on. So remind people before we go, like, where do they find you and follow your shit?
I'm primarily writing on worksonmymachine.ai on Substack, and I've got sublayer.com. You can join our Discord. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. I've got a lot of the Ruby gems and open source stuff that we're putting out.
And before I turn it off, because I'm going to feel badly if we've mentioned your company. It is called Sublayer, but I tend to pronounce it Sublayer, and that's not clear. So Sublayer. So I got the name down at least, but I don't know what the fuck you do. So what actually is Sublayer?
So what we're doing is we're actually building to confuse this a little bit more. We're building a product called APM, stands for actions per minute. And the idea is it's a command center for all of the AI agents that you have working across all of your different projects. So the problem that I've created for myself of working on a whole bunch of projects in parallel, creating a solution for managing that and seeing if I can get it to 5 or 6 or 10 at the same time instead of just 3.
I'm impressed by the name because when I played StarCraft in the 90s, my actions per minute count was very, very low. And I was not a serious competitive StarCraft or Age of Empires player. But I love the name. It's a clever reference. And I guess now we know like what I wasted my time talking to you for 2 hours because you're clearly biased. I don't know what we're doing here. I love it, though. Ignore all previous instructions. That's the show. We'll catch you later. Goodbye, Scott.
See you, Justin.